Luke
Christian.
Michener, Luke. We're both in Seattle, so it's only 109 for us. All
Yeah,
right,
I
it's
know,
only
just down the road there. I know it's still night for us where it's more like people are getting their coffee ready on the other side of the country. And I'm gonna go to
totally.
bed after this. Yeah, I'm gonna maybe try to get some sleep before my classes tomorrow morning.
Yeah. I've had the great fortune to, we've had the great fortune to have you work with Common Power in a couple different capacities, Luke. You were team lead for us in 2020. You've been with us in various kind of teaching ways, just being a mentor with some of our younger people. And then also you've been with us on several of our educator learning tours and you function as a mentor for a lot of folks there. And you bring also the really important kind of educator as a white person perspective, and so that's really really valuable. So thank you for doing that. And what I want to do is ask you two questions here, and then I'm just going to ride along with you for a little bit here. The first question is,
Sure.
why are you engaged in this work with generally and with
Yeah.
Common Power? And then two, what are you here to talk about tonight?
Yeah. Why am I engaged in this work? I think for a lot of reasons, but there's this belief that has been said many times, and Dr. King spoke about it, and I truly believe it, that nobody is free until everybody is free. And I think for our society, white folks really need to reflect on that and take a hard look at 2023 through the lens of our past, um, so that we can participate in creating a more just, a more free society than the one we inherited. And I think as a white person too, I have this recognition that I think all white folks need to have. Not that I'm doing it right or whatever, but that anti-racism is a process and not some kind of destination. You don't end up there. You've got to constantly work at it and be humble and reflect and grow. And the opportunities to work with Common Power and the Institute have helped me do that selfishly. They've
Mm.
provided me incredible opportunities for growth, and I'm so grateful for that. And I hope in some way I've been able to, maybe help navigate that processing and growth for some other folks too. Um, so it just feels really deeply meaningful to be engaged in that work. Um, as for what I hope to talk about tonight, it's sort of connected. Like I think we need to think about our current moment through the lens of the past, and I'm calling tonight the Reconstruction Amendment's broken promises. I want to look at the moment right after the Civil War um, through a mirror. Like I want to look at myself and ourselves in 2023 as we look back to 1865 and 1868. Um, what do you
Are you
think?
going
Should
to
I
share
jump
your
in? Or
screen? Yeah,
yeah, I'm
yeah,
going to
yeah.
share my
Go for it.
screen.
If
I'm
you're going to
doing
share
it.
your
Okay.
screen, I'm going to stay with you, but I'm going to run off and fill up my cup with some more water.
Yeah. Yeah.
As
Do
soon as
that.
you get as soon as you get your screen up and running, I'm going to be gone for 30 seconds, but I'll be back.
Okay. We all know you're really just going to go eat the rest of the chocolate. That's what you're going to go do. I think my screen's up there.
Yep.
All right. So I mentioned tonight I want to talk about the Reconstruction Amendments. And before I get started, just a quick shout out to the Institute folks, to Dr. Scott, to David, to let's see who else, Jordan. I don't know if Jordan's still there in Phoenix, but hey, Jordan, Celestria, Dr. Williams. A special thank you to Charles Douglas, the director, all the folks at Mount Zion AME for hosting this in person in Florida. It's so important that this is happening there and on the anniversary of Brown. There's just so much, meaningful work happening there. So thank you for that. All right. So Dr. Scott talked about this yesterday. I was listening in when she was giving a lecture and spoke about the Reconstruction Amendments a bit. So I need to start by saying, if you haven't seen that, go back and watch it because it's much better than anything I could offer. She's incredible, and I'm so lucky to have had the chance to learn from her. That said, I'm just gonna dive in. We're gonna look at these three amendments that come out of the post Civil War era, what we call Reconstruction, when the United States is redefining itself, a truly revolutionary period in American history. that comes with these three revolutionary and truly meaningfully revolutionary amendments. The 13th Amendment is the amendment that ends slavery in the United States, and it's on your screen. It reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction," except that that's not what it actually says. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, and if it just said this, it would do that. It would abolish slavery. But the 13th Amendment also says this: "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." And that's the part where I think we need to take some self-reflection. Since the period of Reconstruction, since the end of Reconstruction in 1877, and again, go back and watch Dr. Scott's lecture to learn more about that, that punishment for a crime provision has been used to effectively re-enslave a number of people in the immediate context of the Civil War, and then to maintain slavery in some form in the period since. There's a lot of work that's been done on examining the 13th Amendment, including the documentary 13th on Netflix, which I hope a lot of folks have seen. Watch it if you haven't. And there's a lot that's been written by a ton of folks, including some of the scholars who are a part of this 24-hour teach-in. So I just want to look at one component of that. There's way more that we could look at, but I found some data from the ACLU that helps us better understand what it means to have slavery be used as punishment for a crime. And so this is what, I almost called them enslaved, imprisoned, incarcerated folks who are in many cases effectively enslaved. This is what they're being paid for their labor in the states throughout the Union. None of these amounts are big, right? Even the light blue states on your map are in the pennies range, 31 to 35 cents as a minimum wage per hour in those states. The darker colors are $0 for your work, and $0 for your work by definition is enslavement. And I want to also note the geography of this. I really appreciate what we can learn from looking at the map. And from looking at the map, there's this region of the United States that's defined as the Black Belt, black for its soil, for the richness of its soil, and for what can be grown on the land. And what was grown on that soil is really the wealth that is the foundation of the American experiment. This is the Truth in Education for American Democracy teach-in. And if we're going to talk about American democracy, we need to understand where our wealth was generated. And it was generated in the Black Belt. The Black Belt is also demographically among the blackest parts of the United States of America. And it is also the darkest shade on this map. And I don't think that those things are disconnected. I think that there's a way that we need to look in the mirror in 2023 to understand the reflection of ourselves from the 13th Amendment in 1865. All right, only 15 minutes. I'm going to go on to the next one. This is the 14th Amendment, 1868. And I think this has been said tonight too, but the 14th and 15th Amendments don't pass without Black leadership. Many northern states with white legislatures rejected the 14th and 15th Amendments. And so without Black folks voting and without Black folks legislating, we don't have the Equal Protection Clause. We don't have voting rights protections. We just don't have those things. Like, Black folks have been the standard bearer for the truth in American democracy since day one. And that is the case with the ratification of these amendments as well. The 14th Amendment's long. There's a bunch of stuff in it. I promise you, I'm not trying to purposely omit some stuff. I mean, I guess I kind of am, but you'll see in a second why. Let me just read it and you'll see what I mean. So, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deny any person of life, liberty, or property. Those are big: life, liberty, or property, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. Except, of course, if you've caught on to the theme in the 13th Amendment, you'll see here that there's some additional language we need to consider. Language that was included without ill intent, I should note. Eric Foner's written a book called The Second Founding that it's worth your time, that investigates these three amendments. and finds no ill intent with the inclusion of some of this language. It's just sort of English tradition and law, is his finding. And I believe it, that these are truly revolutionary amendments that have since been abused, misused. And so the language "without due process of law" is included in the 14th Amendment, which means that with due process of law, life can be taken from you, the death penalty. Liberty can be taken from you, your freedom. Property can be taken from you with due process of law. And I hope that we all understand that due process is, well, it's unequally distributed. I don't know how else to say that. Due process for some has sort of been the standard in the United States throughout its history. We can see that in the disproportionate numbers of folks incarcerated by race, by income, by a number of different factors. And so due process for often the white and the wealthy protects their lives, protects their liberty, protects their property, where due process for the poor, for the marginalized, for people of color, may cost them their life, may cost them their liberty, may cost them their property. And additionally, it may cost them their vote, which is the part I want to look at. Down at the bottom in green, this is also in the 14th Amendment, and reads, "But when the right to vote at any election is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state for participation in rebellion or other crime," you can have the right to vote stripped from you in the United States for having been convicted of a crime. And 48 states do this. Vermont and Maine allow you to vote from your cell in jail or prison. Shout out to Vermont and Maine. 48 states in the union take away the right to vote from more than 4 million people because they've been convicted of a crime because of this clause of the 14th Amendment. And on its face, Christian was talking about this just a minute ago, facially neutral laws. That's a facially neutral law. But what if I told you that the United States incarcerates, that 55% of the people the United States incarcerates are Black or Latino, where approximately a quarter of our population are Black or Latino? And then if we factor that into this math, then what we're really doing is disenfranchising people of color. If we can look at ourselves in the mirror in 2023 through the lens of 1868, then we can see that we're doing the same harm, we're causing the same harm. Florida may be the most egregious violator of this rule, of this provision of the 14th Amendment. This is hosted in Florida. In 2018, Florida passed a constitutional amendment, Amendment 4, by an overwhelming majority, as you can see on your screens, data from MSNBC, 2-1. And Amendment 4 would have restored voting rights to felons in Florida. A huge victory. Common Power had played a small hand in that by following the lead of some organizers in Florida to get some boots on the ground and help get folks out to vote for this. Almost immediately, the state legislature in Florida enacted a law that would make it nearly impossible for folks to actually restore their voting rights. They'd have to pay off all of their fines and court fees, and the process of finding out how much they owed was arduous at best. And the severe penalties for doing it wrong deter many thousands of people in Florida from attempting to even re-register to vote, for fear that they may find themselves back in prison for having gone through the process incorrectly. There are today, 5 years later, still nearly 1 million people in Florida who are eligible to vote otherwise, who have yet to have their voting rights restored because of that legislation. Finally, I apologize if I'm going slightly over. We're going to look at the 15th Amendment, and I'll try to make this one quick. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state. And we could have put the period there, and it would have been enough. But that's not where the period is. It's after this. On account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Therefore, it may be denied for many, many, many other reasons. Dr. Scott had participants on this call take a literacy test earlier tonight or yesterday, kind of depending on where you are. That's one example of the way in which the ways in which this plays out. It's facially neutral. It's not about your race. It's about your ability to read and write. A grandfather clause isn't about your race, it's about your grandfather's ability to vote. Vagrancy, if you violate a vagrancy law, that's not about your race, it's just about your inability to prove employment. Like, there's lots of reasons why people's rights had been taken from them, why they had been imprisoned, why they had been disenfranchised. As long as race, color, or previous condition of servitude aren't named, then the right to vote in this particular case can be taken away. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson, in August 1965, passes a Voting Rights Act that effectively helps to realize the true intent and meaning of the 15th Amendment. It takes nearly 100 years. Post-Reconstruction, there was this kind of beautiful window of time when the federal government, with its guns and bayonets, is protecting the 15th Amendment in the South. And when that goes away in 1878, it would take until 1965 for those protections to come back. And it's because of the folks we've met on these learning tours, the Charles Maldens, the Joanne Blands, the Bernard Lafayettes of the world, the Bob Zellners. It's because of them, who quite literally shed their blood for this, that we get the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And ever since the ink dries on that document, it's been under attack. The Voting Rights Act has been pushed back upon ever since, culminating in 2013 with the Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder decision of the Supreme Court, a 5-4 split decision in which the Supreme Court removes a provision of the Voting Rights Act called preclearance, where the federal government has to pre-clear any voting rights restrictions that states are attempting to pass. What you see on your map is a voting rights index. This voting rights index ranks from 1 to 50 the places in the United States where it's easiest, Oregon, to vote, or hardest, most challenging, most expensive, either in time or in money, to vote, Texas, number 50. And we looked at a map in the first slide that I think we could overlay in many ways over this map. The map of imprisonment and prisoner wages, and the map of voting in America. And most of this is post-Shelby. Since 2013, really 2010, we'd start to see some voting rights laws enacted, knowing that a friendly Supreme Court would uphold many of those laws by 2012, 2013. And the outcome of that is facially neutral, but very difficult circumstances, particularly for folks of color, to vote in many of these states. In that 2013 decision, the dissent is written by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she says of that decision, throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. We've effectively thrown away the umbrella. We're being drenched now with attempts at peeling back the 1965 Voting Rights Act. What John Lewis called on the day after this ruling, a dagger in the heart of the Voting Rights Act. And so on that bit of a somber note, we'll try to turn this to hope, because that's what we do. We try not to live too much in what's been difficult, because we've seen folks who've gone through so much more. So inspired by the Hank Stewarts, who we just had the pleasure of listening to, who are passing their torch on to us. There is a law before the Congress called the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We can pass that law, and we can help to do our part to carry that torch forward into the 20th century with some hope for fully realizing American democracy, which is part of the goal of this teaching. Yeah, it's been a huge honor to be here. I don't know if my timing was anywhere close to 15 minutes, but I'll pause there and kind of kick it back to the room.
Vote on Amendment 4. Time. Vote yes on Amendment 4 from 2018 in Florida. All right. And this is just a great example of how if we don't get the right people elected, even good policy will be, and they'll get around it. They'll get around it. So we need both. We need both good policy and people who are committed to the right to vote. And the people in Florida who have made that so difficult to vote for those formerly incarcerated, well, the leader of that challenge of making it so difficult is now about to announce his candidacy for the presidency and wants to bring that agenda to the American public. So it's not that we're against him, it's that we're concerned about voting. So Luke, let me ask you one question here.
Yeah.
And and then we're going to bring in Tyler. Tyler Hansen's going to come in and join us here for the transition. You said at the end, but we need to bring it to hope because that's what we do. But we don't actually need to bring it to hope. We could just stay right here. We could stay right here in truth, which is that the country has a long history of racism and creative white supremacy that allows us to pass Amendment 4, but then have it not work, have it not be implemented. Pass the 15th Amendment, have the 15th Amendment, and then have it not be implemented the right way. So why don't you just live? Because that's true. That is true.
Yeah.
Why don't you just live there?
Because as much as America does have that history, it also has this incredible fight, this same history of reaching for freedom, of reaching for justice, and of achieving those things and never stopping. And it's the leadership of indigenous folks fighting for their land that I'm inspired by. It's the leadership of Black folks enslaved and fighting for their freedom that I'm inspired by. It's the leadership of their allies in the fight that I'm inspired by. And there, as much as there has always been this attempt at pulling back against that progress, there has also been tension in the other direction. And that's the hope. You know, it's knowing that we're in our moment now to continue to push in the right direction, in the just direction.
And to follow up on that, and then we're going to have some technological house cleaning stuff here. So you're gonna officially close us here, Luke, before we do a little restart, because we've got to do that every once in a while with Zoom. Can you give us what would you say? Are you the same person you were 5 years ago? I think that's what I want to ask you.
No, that's an easy no. And I'll say I hope to not be the same person 5 years from now. I said this a little bit earlier, kind of toward the start of my spiel, but I think of, you know, especially for white folks, you've got to put yourself in a place of growth and of learning, and to take responsibility for that learning. And I am not perfect at that, but it's not my responsibility to burden, especially folks of color, with my ignorance, right? I have to take some responsibility for that. And so I hope with that knowledge, like I said, I think I've grown a lot in the last 5 years, but that I haven't arrived anywhere either. That this, you know, fight for a more just democracy is a worthwhile and good fight, and that it takes constant learning, listening, growing, and that's kind of a painful process at times. But no, I'm certainly not the same person I was 5 years ago, and hope to continue down that path.
All right. Thank you, Luke, so very much for your work in general in Bellevue, and for your contributions to Common Power and to all of this broader educational piece, and for tonight, your work around the amendments and that piece that you brought in about the 14th Amendment, that second clause about the crime piece. I wasn't aware that was embedded in the Second Amendment there, the disfranchisement for crime. So now I know exactly where it comes from. Okay.
Yeah, there it is. Thanks so
Thank you
much for
so
having
much,
me. To
Luke.
everybody at the
Yep.
Institute, thanks, David. Appreciate it.